want to talk about a concept that I have heard expressed by people on the left. It may also be something that people on the right are espousing, but it's this general idea of not engaging with people when you find their actual core values to be abhorrent. So this idea that if someone comes across as having views that are homophobic, racist, sexist, transphobic, to just write them off as disgusting, don't talk to them, don't associate with them. And I am here today to try to convince you not to do that. And I want to start by telling the story of Daryl Davis. And he is a gentleman that I first heard about only a few months ago, and he is now my hero. He is a Black man who has taken it upon himself to deliberately go out of his way to personally befriend members of the KKK, often like the actual like kingpins, I don't know their official term, but like the people on top that are in charge, and try to get them to rethink their views and ultimately leave the KKK. And he estimates that he's been indirectly responsible for probably a couple hundred members of the KKK leaving that organization, and directly responsible for maybe 20 to 40. I mean, how badass is that? And I suspect if you're watching this, you may be thinking something along the lines of like, that's cool, but that is so far from his responsibility to be doing that. It should not be incumbent upon the people being oppressed and discriminated against to be kind to the people oppressing them and befriend them and get them to change their ways. And that's definitely a thought I had. And it really got me soul searching about this concept of what is our ultimate goal? Like, what sort of energy are we trying to put into this world? Because if what we're trying to do is stay in our safe, secure, comfortable space surrounded by people who are kind and tolerant and compassionate and share our values, yeah, that's comfortable, but it's not really making the world a better place. And if you really want to actually improve kindness and tolerance and compassion in this country, it is going to involve getting out of your comfort zone and engaging with people who you find reprehensible and having tough discussions. And of course, you know your own mental health better than I do. If that's something where you just feel like you can't handle it, like I'm not trying to push you to do that, but it really would be great if some badass, courageous people who are tough enough to do that could do this. And so for those of you who feel up to it, I would just tell you, think about the circumstances in which you yourself had a view that later turned out to not be right. I mean, I don't know, it's hard to call a view right or wrong, but basically something that you changed your mind about and the process that you went through to change your mind. So, I mean, the first thing, and when I think about that with myself, the first thing I would mention is that it is very hard for me to listen to other people who refuse to listen to me. And that's why I really want to emphasize, as much as you might find people hateful and disgusting, I recommend that you listen to them, and you listen to them graciously and kindly, because that is going to make them more inclined to do the same back. It is also a way for you to double check that your initial instincts were right, because I do feel like there's some instances where people see that someone else has a different view and very quickly jumps to the conclusion of the only reason that person could have that view is because they want to control women, or because they're a bigot, or they hate anybody who's not white. And that may be true. That may be true. But it is definitely good to double check and see and make sure that people aren't having a certain view based on information that you don't know. So let's say you go ahead, you listen, and these people, like, you've confirmed it. This person's view is disgusting. It is hateful. they should change. What I recommend at that point is engage with their logic. Because if they really have poor logic, they don't know the research to back up what they're saying, it shouldn't be too hard to argue in that way. You don't need to resort to insults, name calling, trying to shut them up, because that's not going to change their mind. You know, I mean, if you say something and someone just immediately jumps like, oh, you're transphobic, you're going to get defensive, you're going to get antagonistic, you're going to try to seek out anything you can to confirm your viewpoint. So I want to jump back to Daryl Davis, because I found a really excellent anecdote to illustrate this when I was looking into him. What was happening was he was talking to a member of the KKK, and the white man was saying that black men are prone to violence. And when Daryl Davis said, hey, like, I've never shot anybody, I'm not a violent person, then the white guy said something to the effect of, oh, well, that gene must be latent in you. And so then Daryl came back and he rattled off a whole bunch of white serial killers and pointed out how serial killers tend to be white. And he said, you must be a serial killer. And if you haven't killed a bunch of people, then that gene is probably just latent in you. But white people are serial killers. And the guy in the KKK said, dude, like, that's stupid. And Daryl Davis, he came back and he said, yeah, that is stupid, but that's using the same logic. And I love that, because it's something that really prompted the bigoted person to take a closer look at his own views instead of getting overly antagonistic and putting him on the defense. I will say, in my personal experience, when I have changed my mind about something, it is not typically a complete 180 in the course of a single conversation. What happens is someone gets me curious enough about my own beliefs to do my own research. One example, this isn't really an example of like a bigoted view, but I feel like this is a good example of what I'm trying to demonstrate. I remember reading comments online one time talking about gun control in the US and how there's so much gun violence because there's such a permissive gun culture in the US. And I was reading this and I was thinking to myself, well, okay, you can't just look at gun violence, you have to look at mass violence as a whole. Because if you look at other countries and they don't have the kind of guns we do, but they have a whole bunch of people plowing cars into crowds or dropping bombs on people, that's pretty much the same thing. You're killing a bunch of people. So I took to the internet to try to gather some supporting evidence for the argument I was going to make. And when I took to the internet, I discovered, well, no, actually, if you look at mass violence in general, the US still has mass violence at higher rates than other countries. And that's just the kind of thing that you want to prompt people. If they have this idea that immigrants are damaging the economy and you want to tell them, like, no, actually, that's not what happens when you invite immigrants in. If you can prompt someone to get curious enough to go ahead and do their own research, when a person does their own research and can come to a different conclusion on their own, that is really when you see an enduring change in a person's mindset and values. And that's what I would love to see people going out and doing and encouraging.